My first reaction on reading this text in our current context is, geez, a little tone deaf. Like, all well and good to talk about walking in water when it hasn't just destroyed so many homes and businesses and lives. A friend of mine shared the story of her parents' home flooding. That mid-storm, her dad called her, a man that suffers from some dementia and doesn't always communicate with accuracy and clarity. He said, "The water's coming in." And she told him, "Okay, Dad, get a bucket and put it under the leak." And he said, no, the water's already in. And she said, "Oh, well then, Dad, you're gonna need some towels, so get some towels in the bucket." He says, "No, the water, listen." And he starts stomping his feet. And when she heard the water sloshing around his feet, she realized just the problem they had. Her parents had just moved into this home less than a year ago to make things easier on themselves. So she responded with expletives and deployed her husband in their truck to go rescue them in the middle of the storm. It was a heroic effort in waist-deep water and 90-mile-per-hour gusts to get them out of their beloved new home and over to the safety of their daughters, leaving all of their belongings behind. And to this dramatic reality we've just come to this we read about walking on water. And even more provocative, Jesus' question, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" My friend's story is one of many like it. Fortunately, this one ended with everyone being okay, but there are other stories too. You've heard them. Not everyone made it to safety. And even those that did, many have lost so much, devastating loss of irreplaceable pictures and heirlooms and memorabilia. Our sweet church here with hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages and needed repairs. And in an attempt to hold grace and space for those who've had it even worse, we don't even grieve our own loss. And I can't go on. I can't turn the page on this without acknowledging those hurt worst in our community. By and large, it wasn't those with wealthy and sturdy dwellings that were hit the hardest. The neighborhoods that flooded the worst, the neighborhoods that always flood the worst, are those of our impoverished neighbors that are barely making it by. Neighborhoods where it is well known that there is a drainage problem because it's been that way for years. And yet it isn't addressed. Echoes of the 9th Ward in New Orleans after Katrina, also not their first time flooding, and the much needed repairs to the levees there. Now, can any of you look me in the eye and tell me that if coveted voter bloc middle class white folks lived in those neighborhoods, the necessary changes wouldn't have been made by now? This is not just a Mother Nature issue. This is a justice issue. Because people without the opportunity and money to move, people who don't have political sway or financial sway or business owner sway, get deprioritized and remain impoverished by systems that continually ignore them, unless it's to blame them for crimes and our decreasing home values. As if this justifies tearing people's lives apart over and over through failed flood prevention. But just have faith, right? And to a much lesser degree, but no less applicable, our own church here. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage, shrinking giving and budgets, shrinking audiences for a gospel that has been perverted into capitalistic transactionalism that preaches if we are all good boys and girls, God will bless us. When the bills threaten to swallow 100-year history and all our recent efforts to reform and to rebuild and to re-envision. But just have faith, right? And when it's all too big and it's all too much and the world is such a mess and our community is such a mess and our church is a mess and life is such a damn mess and I am powerless over all of it and it is just all so unmanageable. When we can finally admit, when we throw our hands up and yell at Jesus, I'm drowning. That very space, that very chaotic, overwhelming, seemingly impossible space, that is where we're invited to imagine, to begin to believe, to have even a mustard seed of hope and faith in the possibility that there's a power greater than ourselves that might restore us to sanity. Throwing up our hands and shouting to Jesus for help is our only hope. So just have a little faith, right? Even a little. That it's possible, there's a way, that there's some hope of return to sanity, and it's not hanging on my ability to perform or to choose the right answer or to get it all right. That when we get into the I just can't, we dare to hope that there's a response. But I can. Forget where there's a will, there's a way. Believe where there is God, there is a way. So we'll just have a little faith, right? I need to draw your attention to something. The fact that it wasn't until Peter decided to be bold, decided to test things, that we got this dramatic display of Jesus' grace. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, well, Peter, you had enough faith to get out of the boat. Now comes the real faith. Y'all got out of the boat taking the chance on a radical pastor. You got out of the boat committing to dynamic new outreach programs. In the budget meeting last week, I heard the story that this church was told 20 years ago it only had 2 years left. Y'all got out of the boat then too. But somehow we start to forget how quickly we forget that things have been bad or scary or daunting before. And we came through. Somehow we think that this time, this is worse, that this time it's all going to fall apart, that we won't survive, that this time we are finally abandoned in our efforts, that we have finally gone a bit too far, and God is going to teach us a lesson and let us sink. Friend. Oh, friend. This old faith thing again, huh? Still don't have it nailed down, huh? It's a slippery kind of thing, something we don't get to harness and finally just own, something we have to practice over and over every day, something we have to feel the fear and anxiety of grief of all we thought was going to happen and didn't, and start to sink over and over before we once again remember where our help comes from. Once again, reach out and shout. Once again, believe as we start to sink below the surface, perhaps only out of desperation, that there is no other option. We reach out and shout, Lord, save me. Breathe. That's intense, y'all. And it's the exact place where we feel the breadth and depth and enormity of God's love. If it feels like you're sinking, if it feels like the church is sinking, if it feels like Florida or the country or the world is sinking, I won't tell you you're wrong. It very well may be. And I grieve both for myself and the world and all the rest that it usually requires, that level of fear, before we will reach out, before we will open up, before we will become ready to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. not to be 100% confident in it, not assuming that restoration will be, that the sanity will be what we are expecting, what we thought or had in mind, but ready to believe that restoration is possible, that we just might be able to rise above this water after all. But not alone, y'all. That's not how this works. Not by your own will and effort and ability, but when we actually, finally, become willing to believe in a power greater than ourselves. Shall we try?